land of many mysteries, Lemming commits mass suicide by rushing into the sea in droves. Ahead lies the Arctic shore, and beyond, the sea. And still the little animals surge forward. Their frenzy takes them tumbling down the terraced cliffs, creating tiny avalanches of sliding soil and rocks. They reach the final precipice. This is the last chance to turn back. Yet over they go, casting themselves bodily out into space.
Oh, man, Jeff Reed, my auto engineer, came up with that, producer. Lemmings over the cliff. A pile of dead bodies on the beach as one lemming after another goes plunging into the abyss. And ladies and gentlemen, if you watched what happened last night on the floor of the House of Representatives, that's what you saw. You saw lemmings blindly racing off the edge of a cliff, plunging into the abyss below. What you saw last night with this vote on the fiscal cliff bill is you saw the party of Ronald Reagan, the Republican Party of Ronald Reagan, lying in smoldering ruins on the floor of the House of Representatives, giving up any last pretense that they are the party of fiscal responsibility. And John Boehner, in my judgment, utterly abdicating his responsibility as Speaker of the House. Now, I want to be sure you understand what happened in that bill last night, and then we can talk about some of the details. I'm going to be interested in getting your kind of reactions to it as the program develops, and we've got some sound bites that we want to play for you. In fact, let's get the Krauthammer clip number 1 queued up and ready to go. Now, what happened last night is this was a Senate bill. It was crafted by Joe Biden, and Mitch McConnell signed on. Nobody's pretending Mitch McConnell is any sort of a rock-solid conservative, so their fingerprints all over this thing. Obama's just fine with it. It's got everything he wants in it. Goes over to the House. Now, the House has a deal called a Hastert rule. The Hastert rule goes back to former Speaker of the House, Denny Hastert, and he said it, and Nancy Pelosi followed the same rule. If a majority of my own caucus, the caucus that is in the majority in the House of Representatives, if the majority of my own caucus does not support a bill, I'm not even going to bring it to the floor for a vote. In other words, if I don't even have a majority of the people in my own party that want to vote for this thing, I'm not going to give it the time of the day. I'm the Speaker of the House. Elections have consequences. I'm in charge. I decide which pieces of legislation get voted on and which don't. That's part of my responsibility, part of my prerogative as the Speaker of the House. And John Boehner exercised it last night. This is the bizarre thing, that Sandy relief bill. He didn't even give that a vote. And you got a lot of Republicans now are teed off at him. Governor Chris Christie is teed off at John Boehner for not giving this thing a vote. Peter King of New York is teed off at John Boehner for not giving this thing a vote. So clearly he had a choice about, if he has a choice about whether the Sandy relief bill comes to the floor, he's got a choice about whether the fiscal cliff bill comes to the floor. So this only happened because John Boehner made it happen. He was the one that engineered this thing. My good friend Todd Starnes from Fox News, he even tweeted out a tweet last night saying this: Boehner leads Democrats to victory in House. Boehner leads Democrats to victory in House. This was a victory for the Democrats. This was a victory for President Obama. This was a defeat for the Republicans. This was a colossal defeat for fiscal conservatism, and John Boehner engineered this, ladies and gentlemen. He voted for this thing. Now, what it does, here's all you need to know about this bill. It raises taxes by $620 billion. This is the first time in 20 years that the Republicans have enabled a bill that increases income taxes. And John Boehner made this happen. This would not have happened were it not for John Boehner insisting that it happened. The second thing it does is it has no spending cuts whatsoever. Well, there's some minor ones in there, tiny ones. Like it's $1, the CBO calculated this, $1 in spending cuts for every $41 in tax increases. Now, that's what President Obama calls a balanced approach. He's happy with this thing. This is a balanced approach in President Obama's twisted worldview. A $1 in spending cuts for every $41 in tax hikes. So from a substantive standpoint, no tax cuts. So this is a $620 billion tax increase, and it's an increase on job creators. It's an increase on small businesses. It's an increase on the people that create jobs. So who's a loser here? Well, the winner is clear. The winner is President Obama. Hands down, he was gloating. He spiked the football in the White House press briefing room last night. He's pumped. He's excited. He jets off to Hawaii. By the way, that's turned into a $7 million vacation because of the extra round trips he's taken on Air Force One. That thing is like $200,000 an hour to operate, and it's a 9-hour flight to Hawaii. So every time he takes one of those trips, that's $1.8 million to go from the East Coast to Hawaii and back. Now, all he did when he got back here, what did he do? All he did was spike the football last night. He did nothing. He just came back just so he could spike the football last night after he got everything he wanted. And the last thing that's important on this bill is that this is going to increase, according to the Congressional Budget Office, according to CBO, this is going to increase our national debt by $3.9 trillion over the next decade. $3.9 trillion. The debt goes up. The deficit goes up. So let's review, class. $620 billion income tax increase on job creators, the people that we're looking to create jobs for your sons, your daughters, your brothers, your sisters, your parents. They just had their wallets plundered to the tune of $620 billion. Now, what that means, bottom line, what that means, ladies and gentlemen, that's $620 billion that they cannot use to hire a member of your family. That money's gone, sucked into the grinding maw of the federal government. It's out of here. It's gone. It's history. It's in the archives. It cannot be used for any productive economic purpose. So $620 billion tax increase, no spending cuts, and a $3.9 trillion impact on the national deficit. And the Republicans made this happen. John Boehner made this happen. His fingerprints all over this thing, but he was so embarrassed by this thing that as soon as he voted, he left the floor. He went for the tall grass. He went to his hidey hole somewhere. He did not want to talk to the media about this. He's embarrassed. He's ashamed. He's humiliated, and he ought to be. This was a colossal failure of leadership on Speaker Boehner's part. He wanted nothing to do with this, and not a single member of the GOP leadership voted for this thing. Not one single solitary member of the GOP leadership team in the House. Speaker Boehner did not speak on this thing. Paul Ryan did not speak on this thing. In fact, Paul Ryan, ladies and gentlemen, voted for this thing. Paul Ryan, the guy that a lot of conservatives were looking to for 2016, Paul Ryan last night voted for a $620 billion tax increase, no spending cuts, and a $3.9 trillion increase in the national debt. Paul Ryan did that. Speaker Boehner did that. Now Eric Cantor voted against it, but he didn't debate against it. And Kevin McCarthy, who's the majority whip, he's the guy that's responsible to count votes. So he's one of the 4 members of the leadership team. He voted against this thing, but he did not debate against it. So the leadership in the GOP, they know this thing is toxic. It's poisonous. It's horrible. It's no good, very bad piece of legislation. And so they didn't want to have anything to do with it. And in fact, 151 Republicans voted against this thing. Only 85, including Speaker Boehner, voted for it. So his own caucus, by an almost 2-to-1 margin, said, we don't want anything to do with this. We're voting against this thing. It is bad. It's poisonous. It's bad for the economy. We don't want to be anywhere near this thing. And Speaker Boehner brought to the floor a bill that he knew that almost 2/3 of his own party opposed. This thing wouldn't have even seen the light of day if Speaker Boehner hadn't brought it to the floor. Now let's listen to Charles Krauthammer, his analysis of this. This is clip 1. This is Charles Krauthammer, his assessment on the fiscal cliff deal.
There are a lot of conservatives in the caucus, Republican caucus in the House, who hate the bill, and for good reason. I mean, this is a complete surrender on everything. The ratio of tax cuts, of tax hikes to spending cuts is a 40-1 rather than 1-1 or 1-2 or 1-3. So, I mean, there's a complete rout by the Democrats.
A complete rout by the Democrats, a complete surrender on everything. And Charles Krauthammer is exactly right. You know, Ronald Reagan got snookered in 1982, I think it was, by the Democrats. They said, hey, look, we will promise you $3 in spending cuts for every dollar in tax increases. That's our solemn promise to you, President Reagan. You allow us to raise taxes by $1. We promise you we will cut spending by $3 for every dollar. And Reagan went for it. He took the bait. He took the bait and switch. So the tax hikes went up. The spending cuts never came, never, ever. Not one single dollar was ever cut from the budget to make good on those promises. Then George H.W. Bush, remember the read my lips guy? They made a promise to him, 2-1. We promise you $2 in spending cuts for every dollar in tax hikes. George Bush went for it. He fell for it. A second sucker on this deal, a second bait and switch victim, a second sap, if you will. And so what happened? The taxes went up under George Bush. He lost the White House. Spending cuts never, ever came. You know, and Thomas Sowell's got a piece here today. Let me see if I can find that. Just talking about the insanity of the Republicans. Just the insanity of the Republicans. The title of his piece is Happy New Year. He posted this on New Year's Day. And he gave an award for prophecy to Brett Stevens of the Wall Street Journal, who wrote a column back in January 24 of 2012 entitled The GOP Deserves to Lose. And he said this back in January of last year. Let's just say right now what voters will be saying in November once Barack Obama has been reelected. Republicans deserve to lose. Then Sowell goes on, to me, the Republican establishment, think John Boehner and now Paul Ryan, the Republican establishment is the eighth wonder of the world. How they can keep repeating the same mistakes for decades on end is beyond my ability to explain. And then he mentions that Mitt Romney repeated the same mistakes that Thomas Dewey did in 1948. Don't make waves. Don't attack your opponent. Be Mr. Nice Guy. Don't say anything on the campaign trail. And Dewey was a slam dunk to win that thing. The Democratic Party was divided. Harry Truman narrowly won. He goes on the attack, and he wins the thing. Focal Point, AFR Talk. Back in 2.